Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. Look, I'm going to trial something here. It's a teleprompter that follows my voice. So if you see me sort of jerk and stutter, just bear with me. It's first time trialing this. But yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Sihle Ngobese. However, I'm best known as Big Daddy Liberty. Now, Big Daddy Liberty is the brand which I've started. And it's an online brand. Now, for those of you who are Americans in this audience, you'll know that your alternative media space is actually quite big. You know, guys like Joe Rogan, Ben Shapiro, you name it, Steven Crowder. These are guys who are providing different voices in a country which has a well-established and free media, but are giving people options, choices. And I'm essentially trying to do the same thing here in South Africa. So I've started the Big Liberty Show, which is on YouTube, and essentially what the show does is chronicle ordinary South Africans. What do they think? What is on their minds? There's a series that I'm running at the moment, which has seen me speak to all the political parties, specifically the supporters of those parties. I don't speak to politicians, I have no interest in them, but I speak to the ordinary people, the people who come from families and who go to these particular political rallies and manifesto launches with hopes. Because I'm trying to burst the myth that South Africans are different, because we're not. And I'll speak to this as I move along in the speech. So yeah, just a quick punch at the beginning. If you are interested, search Big Daddy Liberty on any of the social media mediums and watch the show and you'll let me know what you think. But of course, the other hat I wear, as I realize that my teleprompter doesn't work, the other hat I wear is I'm the head of strategic operations at the Institute of Race Relations. Now, I know you guys spoke to, or rather France spoke to you guys yesterday, and I know how silent and morose a crowd can be after that speech, because it's very sobering and it's based on hard analysis and hard data, and that's what we work with at the Institute. It's not opinion, it's not us grandstanding or wanting to carve out our own political voices, because we have no interest in that. We have an interest in providing hard analysis, hard data to South Africans that allow you to make the decisions. And I'm going to speak to that tonight, but I think I'm going to be a little bit more different than France insofar as I'm going to characterize what it is that is affecting the South African family. And from there, I will speak to you around how you and me, ordinary South Africans, ordinary people, can actually begin to tackle these issues and get involved in the battle of ideas. So very briefly, the Institute of Race Relations, who are we? We are an advocacy organization that fights for your right to make decisions about your life, your family, your business, free from unnecessary government, political, and bureaucratic interference. And of course, as I mentioned, maybe as I jump into it, if we look at what's happening in the country right now, sadly, the picture being painted, and was painted, for example, by France last night, is a very accurate one. The country is in a bad shape, and the genesis of this are the many bad ideas and policies that are enacted by our political elites. And unfortunately, a lot of these policy decisions are increasingly making it life, or rather, they're increasingly making life harder for ordinary South Africans like you and me, and particularly poor South Africans. All of us in here are in the battle of ideas. Some of us don't even actually realize it. Let me tell you something about your opponents, because I'm sure you've been hearing this whole concept of the battle of ideas, the battle of ideas. Who are your opponents? Well, firstly, your opponents are a very determined, zealous, and cunning lot. And trust you me, they know they're in the battle of ideas. They're well ahead, they're well advanced, if you will, in getting their narrative out, their story, if you will, their reality out. They are a growing tide, if I'm to characterize them. They are a growing tide of trendy lefty populists who we're beginning to see take over the political space in this country. A socialist grouping which quite openly ignores the track record of socialism over the 20th century to suggest that these ideas are new and should be tried again, because if we South Africans try it, we'll make it work. Well, that's the rhetoric at least. And as I said, they are also a growing elite of predatory politicians who ever increasingly see their role as your ruler, not your servant, not your public rep, but as your ruler, your overlord. So this is the sort of broad coalition of who you're dealing with here. It's growing tide of populism, the socialist and socialism that we're seeing in our politics, and of course the predatory politician, the person who believes they should tax you to death, control you to death insofar as regulations, and even tell you how to live, where to live, what to do when you live. These are people who reject the idea of South Africa being a home for all. In fact, they reject the very idea that people should be free, independent, and self-sufficient. They want South Africa that is divided, a South Africa that is characterizes, for instance, white South Africans as being evil settlers, and seeing white South Africans, for instance, as being the source of all our problems in this country, that if you can just get rid of them, somehow the country gets better. And on the other side, and rather condescendingly, they want to paint all black South Africans as, being incapable of free thought. Somehow we're weak and in need of their control. Listen very carefully to the politicians and how they speak. It's always a narrative of how one grouping is the genesis of your problems and should be gotten rid of or stymied in some way. But equally, they'll speak about the majority of South Africans, racially at least, black South Africans, as somehow needing politicians. Like we cannot be free-thinking, independent, self-sufficient without a politician. That's why even the language they use in describing black South Africans is actually quite condescending, the idea of the African child, the black child. Why is it that black South Africans, adults like you and me, able to make decisions about their lives, are referred to in almost childlike way? It comes back to that idea that they believe that they are our parents, they are our overseers, they are our controllers. To achieve these goals, that is, to vilify one and control the other, to achieve these nefarious goals, they are corrupting the very institutions which seek to protect all South Africans, black and white. Most concerningly, they're attacking the very personal freedoms and civil liberties that you and I enjoy. Liberties, by the way, which were hard fought in this country, if you look at the record of our freedom fighters and what they had to do. What freedoms, you might be thinking, Big Daddy, you seem to be talking in broad terms. What are these freedoms that are under attack in this country? Well, our freedom to speak freely and to articulate ideas, whether those ideas are controversial or not, is under attack by people who are increasingly acting like the thought and language police in this country. Good luck having an honest conversation anywhere when someone is ready to attack you and say, how dare you say that? There's always this moral outrage in words. How dare you? Or to shut down that debate or to shut down conversation, the lowest hanging fruit in this country is to label someone racist. That shuts down the conversation because, hey, who wants to talk to a racist, right? Another freedom, if I can just take a brief pause. Sorry about that. Small water interlude. I would play elevator music, but I don't have any. Oh, I hate it when the politicians say cheers after they drink water. Never understood that. But anyway. Another freedom which is firmly within their crosshairs is our freedom to own property for ourselves and our families. It's under threat by politicians who are pushing terrible policies like land expropriation without compensation. Now, whenever I say this in other briefings that I do, it comes across as a very controversial point, because many South Africans still believe that EWC has something to do with land reform. It doesn't. EWC has everything to do with politicians wanting more control and not necessarily addressing the issue of land reform in this country. Let me be precise and specific. If you look at the real genesis of the land question in this country. Very little of it has to do with, and of course, don't get me wrong, there is a bad history in this country of people having been dispossessed. That's why we have a legal system and a rational system that's been enacted, which actually addresses restitution. Restitution is good. That is a matter of justice insofar as where I have been dispossessed and I've proved it, I should have compensation given to me either by that very piece of land, or if I have no interest in farming, if it's agricultural land, then monetary compensation so that I can live the life I'm choosing to live, usually in an urban setting. So I'm not against restitution. Every South African should be shouting at the hilltops for restitution. What I'm against is the politics where you start hearing issues such as redress. Redress is not restitution. Redress essentially means I'm taking what should be a matter of justice and putting it into the hands of political control, where someone in politics decides who gets and who doesn't get. Now, redress is exactly what happened in this country from the colonial years through apartheid to now. Redress was the 1910 hut and pole tax, the 1913 Land Act. By the way, that the hut and pole tax you're never told about, because it's an inconvenient truth. It is the Group Areas Act. That is redress. That is a group of politicians deciding who wins and who loses in society. So you don't want that. You don't want to give politicians that sort of power. Instead, you want a system which recognizes justice, where if there is a victim of something and there is a clear dispossession, a item that was stolen, a legal process should be gone through, an arbiter of our disputes, a judge, decides on that matter, and then obviously justice is served at that point. So, sorry, I digress quite a lot there. I do this quite a lot. So maybe to come back to the point, the freedom to own your property, again, one more digression. As classical liberals, which is what I am, we speak a lot about the individual this, the individual that, but really we're a family society, and individuals in this country will do anything and everything for the benefit of families. That is the most powerful agency you'll ever see in any person, so that even if you're sitting at a traffic light, waiting for that green light, and there's a car next to you of some lady frantically putting on makeup, and a truck to your other side of a lorry driver with some sand in the back, every person in that little equation is working for their family, yet they're still individuals. So those are the things that I always argue that South Africans have in common. So stop believing the rhetoric that we're different, that we're different groupings and we hate each other and we're about to have a race war. It's just not true. South Africans intrinsically care about family, and I'll get to this concept of family. But back to the point. I did warn you that I digress a lot. Our freedom to own property, as I said, is under assault by this predatory grouping of politicians and socialists. So that the question becomes, if we are to win this battle of ideas, let me take a step back. If we are to win this battle of ideas, firstly, you need to understand the methods of your opponents, and this is where I'll be a little technical and social sciencey. You need to understand the actual methods of your opponents. Now, as I said, they are a crooked coalition of various interest groups who reject the idea of South Africa being a home for all. They hate the idea of us being free, independent, and self-sufficient. Now, to divide this country and to erode our values and our morals, they have resorted to using identity politics and groupthink, where nobody is an individual to be judged by their God-given character or merit. And instead, they'll argue that each of you are determined by either your identity, so your race, or your gender, your ethnicity, your income level, or any other social determinants. That's what they think you are. So if I am a white South African or an Indian South African, it is my being an Indian that determines my character and who I am. So I can be judged by the fact that I'm an Indian South African. Imagine that. If you are a mixed race individual, I often wonder what you're supposed to be at that stage. Who decides who you are at that stage? How do you decide who that person is without actually looking at who they are and who their character is? But that's essentially the politics we're facing today. It's people who do not believe that individuals can actually have their own volitions, their own personality, their own dreams, their own values. You have to be some sort of nebulous social grouping that they decide, and they then attribute some sort of villainous character to. Whites are evil, blacks are criminals, Indians are racist, as Malema called all Indians in this country. Khalids are in over-concentration in the Western Cape, as Jimmy Manyi said about Khalid South Africans in the Western Cape. These are the sort of characters of what your politics is beginning to morph into, and the identity politics that we're seeing there. Now, this doesn't come from anywhere, this doesn't come from nowhere. This outlook is fueled by an axis of grievance study academia and these so-called social justice warriors. Now, these are people who have not only corrupted university spaces, but are beginning to corrupt society at large with their bad ideas. Most concerningly, they are producing graduates who enter the world of work and society with these terrible postmodernist ideas, such as critical race theory, intersectionalism, and cultural Marxism. This is the basket of ideas that speak to the identity politics that I speak to and support the socialist or the socialism and the leftist ideology and the populism. These are people who, for instance, as I've quite aptly described, view you as an identity and not as an individual. In fact, they refuse to see you as an individual, no matter how much you protest your actual existence, ironically. What do? They shut down free speech, they shut down free thought, including religious freedom, by the way. And often, they do this violently. There's the Lee I was looking for. They do this violently, suppressing opposing views that would counter their bad ideas. They suppress them through intimidation and violence, whilst at the same time cunningly claiming to be victims themselves, which allows them to shield themselves, of course, from scrutiny. We've seen this, guys. We've seen this. None of what I'm saying is abstract or academic. Our TV screens were ablaze about a year ago, or 2 years ago, with a formation called Rhodes Must Fall. Now, Rhodes Must Fall, if you look at the language they use, or rather, the intentions are always good. You can never fault them on the intentions. So if someone says to you, hey, I believe South Africa needs to work on its own African identity and shed a lot of the colonial past that it has, a reasonable person might listen to this and go, yeah, that sounds good. But then you'd expect, as a reasonable person, that the debate and the conversation would begin at that point, because they've put a proposition to us, right? But no debate happens, because the moment you engage them, what happens? There's a mob. And by the way, I speak from experience. I've faced down mobs on university campuses who want to shut down the debate, shut down the free speech. Why? Because how dare you? How dare you come here and speak about freedom and liberty and free thought and free speech? Who are you to do that? We have determined the narrative on this campus. We have determined what the thinking pattern is, and you have no place to be here. That is the modus operandi. That is what they learn on campuses. And that is what, when they then graduate and become your lawyers, become your congregants in your church, become your pilots, become your doctors, that is the stuff that they push into the workplace. And invariably, if you look at the statistics, the vast majority of these individuals come from social sciences qualifications. So they'll end up in the the social sciences type professions, HR, social work. Now, you have people who literally hold these sort of ideas in spaces where they get institutional power in the workplace. If your HR person believes that they can judge you based on your race, you're in a lot of trouble. If the law supports them doing that, because our law invariably also is informed by politicians, same politicians who are influenced by the academia, same politicians who are being fed young blood, if you will, from the same universities, if they're also influenced by that type of thinking, then the very institutions I spoke about earlier on that are meant to protect us are becoming corrupted. So I hope you're seeing the pattern. Maybe as I wrap up on this particular point of who your opponent is and their methods, Let me share with you their defining features so you know what to look out for. You'll be better armed. Don't say Big Dad didn't look after you. There are 3 features that speak to this crooked coalition who perpetuate bad ideas. The first is victimhood. You are not worth your salt. In their way of thinking, you are not worth your salt if you are not a victim of something. This is why identity is important to them, because they will pick a part of your identity which historically may have some victim status, right? So Jewish, Holocaust, victim. Black, colonialism, apartheid, victim. White, not a victim. According to them at least, right? Indian, indentured servants came here on a what was the first ship that brought Indians here? The Truro. Indentured servants, victims, and so forth. Once they give you, or once they use victimhood as the lingua franca, they then rank you, and it almost becomes an oppression Olympics, where if you are black, gay, disabled, grew up with a terrible childhood, you're at the top. You must be at the top. You are the prime example of victimhood. That's where you are. And of course, they'll work it down, right? Along these sort of weird categories, until you get to white male, who just like, oh, you're not a victim of everything. You just happen to be there, so we had to put you on the list. Just white male, just not a victim though. So the first one is victimhood, the idea that you must trade in some sort of victimhood in order to be heard, in order to have a bigger voice than anybody else. And that's where the hierarchy comes in. The second thing is then perpetual anger. If you're a victim, if you are victimized by something or someone, if something oppresses you, then surely you're angry about it, right? As you would. I mean, if I was trying to pick someone here, I love how the eyes sort of glance away when I look into the audience. If I was beating this man every day, and he's my friend, but every day I hit him on the head, oh, you're stupid, you're silly, how could you say that? You become angry, like, Sihle, why are you doing this? Like, we're friends, right? And his anger is justified, but I'll get to that one. But anyway, the segue is that once you're a victim, you have every right to be angry and perpetually angry about your oppression and who oppresses you. Now, this anger is important because it moves on to the third characteristic or feature, which is justified hate. An angry person, and you've seen this in your own interpersonal relations, an angry person, when they say hateful stuff, what do we usually do? Oh, we understand, he was angry, But they translate that interpersonal relation to society, and they argue the victim, who has every right to be angry, is therefore justified to be driven or guided by hatred, right? That hatred then plays out in behavior. It manifests itself in behavior. So if your roads must fall, of course you can throw some feces on a statue in public. Nothing wrong with that. If your fees must fall, again, I'm not judging the intentions, I'm just looking at the behavior and the chronology of it. If your fees must fall, if you burn a school bus, kill a security guard, burn him to death, burn down university buildings, intimidate and assault fellow students, including at a res, denying white students the opportunity to have dinner because blacks must eat first. These are all things, I'm not just saying, these are all things that happened. Walking into private property, taking out art pieces, burning them on the street, almost reminiscent of Nazi-style burning of books. These are all things that are okay, because remember, you're a victim, you're angry about being a victim, and your hatred is justified. 3 things that characterize the opponents that you're facing in the battle of ideas. Now, if we're to resist these bad ideas and the hate-filled rhetoric that comes with it, which is designed to divide us and label us, as I said, white settlers, clever blacks, Indians are racist. If we're to beat this, we've got to stand together. We must reject our opponents' methods of dividing us, and we actually must stand together and realize that at the end of the day, there is no difference. We're just a group, if you will, of different families in this country, all of us looking to achieve the same thing. Prosperity, families doing well, we doing well. Now, as I move to my last sort of quarter of the speech, I want to share with you the fact that you don't stand alone in this battle. The IRR, as an institute, we do some of the most extensive polling in this country. Our polls are used by companies, politicians, you name it. Very accurate polling that is done by us. We understand South African sentiment, we understand South African opinion. And in our recent poll, we asked people the question, do you think South Africans need different race groups and different class groups in order for the country to succeed? 3 out of 4, 75% of South Africans said yes, they believe that the different classes and race groups in this country need one another if they're to realize the country's potential. You are part of the majority, never fool yourself. So what can you do to join the battle of ideas and begin to fight back against the racist populism, the predatory politicians, and the socialism that seeks to manipulate our country and our families? Well, at the most basic level, join us in the fight. We in the IRR are already in the fight. Our media operation alone is one of the most extensive in the country. We put ideas into the newspapers, radio, TV, so that we can actually push back against the bad ideas. For example, and I'll use one random example. When we in terms of our fight against EWC, last year alone, I actually didn't put down the numbers here, I'm seeing it now, but I'll remember them. On EWC alone last year, in combating those who were arguing in favor of it, we put out 364 opinion pieces alone. 158 interviews were done. There are about 450 citations. In other words, in a newspaper, in a radio article, on TV, you would have heard the IRR has said this about on EWC, and 27 press releases. Now, I know these just sound like numbers, but these are insane numbers. If you look at the average of what the DA in the Western Cape did, for instance, because that's the only reference I have, we put out 27 releases. They put on average 4. But I can be quoted on that. In addition to our extensive media reach, my colleagues lobby foreign governments who have embassies here, major corporations, businesses, and of course, people like you and me, ordinary people, so that you become aware. However, as I said, this battle is about you. We are fighting for you and your families. And this is where I love this talk, and I'll go off script a little bit. There are 3 things that define the average South African, so that just in case you get manipulated by politicians, you can always reference this and go, actually, you're wrong. Number 1, South Africans, or let me put it this way. 3 things that define South Africans is our faith, our love for the flag, and our love for family, the triple Fs. Faith, flag, and family. I'll briefly unpack these. On faith, 88% of South Africans say religion is an important part of their lives. As a recent Ipsos poll that was conducted, 88% of us recognize our faith, our religion, as an important part of our lives. Why does this matter? I'm not trying to say, we need to be religious nuts. That's not what I'm saying. The point I'm driving at is South Africans derive their values, the actual values of who we are, from our faith, from our religion, not from socialist textbooks, not from bad ideas and populism, from things that actually speak to our character as people. So our faith is important to us in that perspective, so that even if you are Hindi or Christian or Jewish, there are values that you believe should define who you and your family are in terms of how you view other people too. That's where the tolerance comes from. That's where the love for each other comes from as South Africans. Second one, of course, is the flag. Now, when I talk about the flag, people go, ha-ha, caught you. There's that nationalist in you, talking about the flag. How dare you? Will you be running through here? I don't run. Will you be running through here with the flag? Demanding that we sign up. No. When I talk about the flag, I talk about the South African who you will find at Heathrow Airport in a lobby, and just by hearing their accent, you glow. You talk to them. Hey, bro, where you from? Tell me about your life. What are you doing here? I'm talking about the South African who you'll find in the weirdest place, Phuket. And you see them, okay, I won't share that story, but anyway, the point is we love each other. We really, really do. And if you were to listen to the political rhetoric alone, you would think South Africa is at the point of a race war. But if you look at the real South Africa, the person who actually stands for that flag and says, I understand what those multiple colors means in a real way for me, those people are people who love this country, who do anything to see it prosper, to see it free. And the last area is families. At the end of the day, all of you are here because you care about your families. All of you will put up with, if you hate your job, an 8-hour day for your families. I love my job, so hey. There is nothing more special than watching a family in the morning, for instance, as everybody gets up and starts thinking about their day, how a parent will care about their children first. Are they dressed properly? Did they have breakfast? Do they have all their books? Think about the thought process you have to go through to think about all those things and still think about what you need to do in the day. Before you even get to yourself, my wife or my husband, are they dressed properly? Have they had breakfast? Will they be safe going to work today? That's the thought process of the South African, his love for family. So don't let people tell you otherwise. So those are 3 things, those are triple Fs, if you will. And those are the things that I stand for, those are the things that I fight for. You are the silent majority, black and white, rich and poor, who are often labeled conservative because you're God-fearing, largely law-abiding, and I say largely because I've seen you when you cross that red robot when you shouldn't, and family-orientated. Let me repeat that. You're God-fearing, law-abiding, and family-orientated. That is the formula, that is the glue between those triple Fs. So that our ideas in the IRR, what we argue are the good ideas that we're trying to push into society, seek to place power and authority back into your hands and that of your families, because I believe you as the parent, you as the family, you as the individual, you know what's actually best for your interest and your family. Not a politician, not an official in Pretoria. As I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, part of what I do for the Institute of Race Relations is I'll be touring this country from the Limpopo to the Cape, from the Karoo to Khayelitsha, basically taking the message of liberty, the efficacy, if you will, of good ideas, and the power of property rights and a market economy into every home across this country. These are the ideas that build a property-earning, a prosperous, and a free society. These are the good ideas that I want to empower people to fight for and to stand for. I don't want you to fight for a politician. I don't want you to fight for a race. That's silly. It's frivolous. I want you to have a basket of good ideas that you can stand for and say, actually, to the politician, you're wrong. This is what builds an income-earning, prosperous, and a free society. Let me share a few examples as I conclude, so that you know what I talk about when I travel across the country. And hey, who knows, maybe in this room, I'll be invited to come speak around your neck of the woods. Because by the way, I don't just address big crowds like this. If you come to me and say, hey, I'm gonna organize a braai, I'm gonna have 5 or 8 of my buddies, I'll come and speak. We'll brief you, we'll provide the hard analysis, and we'll give you an opportunity to understand what's happening in the country. Sorry, this is becoming tatters. But what are the ideas that I speak about when I do come when invited? And I'll give you 3 examples, just to wrap up. On safety and security, I'm gonna speak about what's called the enabling opportunities, the opportunities that any society needs in order to advance and prosper. Safety and security, healthcare, and education. On safety and security, some of the ideas that I share with communities across the country is that whether you're in a township, a suburb, or a rural part of the country, we want communities and neighborhoods to take charge of their safety in the area. And that becomes a case of, on the one hand, jacking up the police service, making sure that they become professionalized and actually meet their obligations, And then the other, community involvement, neighborhood watches, which are well-resourced, known by the community, and actually serve the community. So one of the ideas I often share, which people clap loudly for, and I'm not goading anybody into that, we propose that any security upgrades that you do to your home, or any expense that you incur regarding security, should actually be tax deductible. Far too many South Africans spend way too much money on improving the safety of their homes and their families, and it's a cost you never recoup, because essentially you've paid the tax that goes to a police force that doesn't protect you. So we believe that actually should be tax deductible. Gentlemen at the back, just let me know how I'm looking on time, because I'm waffling away. 2 minutes. All right, I'm wrapping up. Another idea that I shared when I went to the EFF rally and the ANC rally and the DA rally is that actually communities must be allowed to elect their station commander during the time of local government elections, or at the very least, that the CPF should have, that's the Community Policing Forum, should have greatly expanded powers to appoint a station commander. There's nothing worse than walking into your local police station after having received bad service and saying, I need to speak to a station commander to report this. No one knows who that is. A person's aloof. I want people to develop, as I've already mentioned, highly organized and well-resourced neighborhood watch schemes that are actually integrated with your private security providers in the areas, which often do a better job than SAPs in terms of visible policing, and of course the SAPs themselves, once you improve SAPs of the police. On health, if I can breeze through these, because I see my 2 minutes is becoming one. On health, we reject the idea of the ANC's NHI, or the National Health Insurance. Basically, what they want to do is nationalize health. That will be effectively creating an ESCOM in the health sector. Why? Because we know in this country that politicians are terrible at running anything. So why on earth would you give them complete control of healthcare? It sounds great because they'll use great intention language, healthcare for all. Universal access, but the intention and the outcomes are different things. So what we're proposing actually is break up the health budget and allocate it to families so that they can buy insurance for themselves and their families. In addition to that, the state should be selling its own infrastructure, the clinics, the hospitals, to private groups, your Mediclinics, your life groups, so that poor people have access to the same quality that you and I have when we go to seek medical help. And of course, let's break the stranglehold of universities, state universities being the only ones that can train doctors and medical professionals. You need to bring in the private sector, let them train the doctors so that we have much more. On education, similar concept. I want to breeze through this because I can see the, oh, thanks. Thanks for that. On education, a similar concept. The biggest problem that poor people face in this country is that they don't have choice because they don't have income. You and I who work, and by the way, I'm not saying we're rich, but the very income that we do have, the savings that we're able to build, buys us better choices than a poor person. So my argument is, why don't you do the same for poor people? The South African government spent 369 billion rand last year on education. It's the largest budget of anything except the military. But can anybody tell me here that the outcomes of that spending were good? Of course not. So what do? Take it out of the hands of the politicians, the money, take it out of the hands of the officials, put it into the hands of parents. You can break that budget down, and my analysts say, on average, you can give a family 16,000 rand per child for the parent, to choose where they take their child to school. So that's the one side, right? That's the demand. On the supply side, government can sell a school for 1 rand. or at least the management of a school, a government school, for R1, so that organizations like Curo, even the former Model C schools, they can establish groupings that can buy these schools, manage them, and attract that business you've now created of 16,000 Rand per parent that's available. Religious organizations can do the same. There's always been Catholic schools in this country, the Morris Brothers, ones come to mind. They can also benefit. You can band together as business people, entrepreneurs, start a quality school, and essentially be guaranteed business because the poor parents would have the capital. This is how you empower a nation. You remove the resources, you remove the power from politicians, and you place them into the hands of decision makers in the home. Those are the ideas that we in the IR stand for. That is what Big Daddy Liberty stands for. So the only thing I can say to you now is, will you join us? Will you help support the IR as I travel the country, my colleague France travels the country, and we speak to people like you and me, and we share these ideas so that people have something they can fight for, which is real, tangible, not the fickle politicians, not the bad ideas of socialism, real things that speak to what a family can do to empower itself. So, as I conclude, it's a bit of a personal one for me because I was raised by a single parent who was physically handicapped. I know what it's like for a person who has no options but the state. I know how crippling it is for them. I know how demeaning it is for them. So that my mission is a personal one. I want to be able to see other poor families in this country benefit from ideas that actually empower them, that give the parent an option to say, my child gets the best. It's very possible. And what I'm asking everybody in this room today, is to support us. I've been going across the country asking ordinary people to support the Roadshow, the Friends of Liberty, but also in a small monthly contribution. There are already hundreds of South Africans across this country who've heard this message, who want to be a part of it, and who want to support me to get across the country, to get to those communities, and to speak to people. And some of them do a monthly contribution of $20. I have a granny in Khayelitsha who's on state assistance. And she says, look, Mtanam, I can't give you a lot of money. I don't have a lot of money myself, but I will put 20 rands in every month so you can reach other communities and share the story. On average, the average person gives us 90 rand a month. And trust me, this is money that we use to get there, to get the message out and to share with ordinary South Africans. Because really, I believe that we can build this nation and build this economy if we work together. Thanks.
Yes, sir.